Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming to the Learners Workshop on an intro to GitHub. I kind of made it a longer title here, Intro to Git and GitHub for Project Collaboration. So a little bit about me, I'm Jenelle. I am a sophomore computer science major at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And my first hackathon was Rowdy Hacks a year ago, so I'm super happy that I got to organize it this year, and I hope you all take away as much from this workshop as I did from the GitHub workshop last year. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So first off, I just wanted to explain Git and GitHub. So Git is a version control system, and this means that it will just track your changes that you make to the code. So this makes it easy to look back and look at the history and see what code looked like at each part of your project, and also revert if necessary. So if you get like all the way over here and you're like, oh, that's wrong, like I need to go back here, then you can do that. We won't get that far because this is just an intro, but that is the idea. And Git, we will be using Git commands in our terminal to make changes to our local repository and global repositories. And if you don't know what those mean, don't worry, we will get to that. And then GitHub is a website. Really, it's a hosting site for Git repositories. And so repository is just a code base. So it's just your code. All your code lives in a repository. And so GitHub will host that for you so that you and all your team can see it and access it. GitHub also provides a GUI for some of the Git commands. So it'll provide buttons instead of you having to type it in the terminal. So why would we use Git and GitHub? So the reason that we have a Git and GitHub workshop at Rowdy Hacks is because Git and GitHub are used for project collaboration. So you have your local repository, which just means your code on your computer, but you also have 2, 1, 3 other teammates that have code on their computers. So how do you all share code? And the answer is Git and GitHub. And you can also work together on these changes. So if somebody makes a change and you think that, oh no, like that's not what we were going for, you all can approve it as a group or make changes as a group. So that's really great. Also, I mentioned the version control aspect of it, where you can see kind of like your history and revert. If you're interested in looking in that, I would encourage you to look outside of this workshop because this is just a beginner's workshop. And then the last thing that GitHub and Git offers, specifically GitHub offers, is a place to display your code. So you can attach your GitHub to the dev post here at the end. You're going to have to. And it's also a way for people like recruiters or anybody else who you're working on like a project with to just see your code. So it's really awesome. All right, so I have a little bit of a resources document, so I'm just going to kind of go through this quickly. If you haven't seen it, it should be linked to this session. If you have a Linux or Mac operating system, then you already have Git, but if you have Windows, you want to install Git Bash, and I left instructions in that file for you. And the other thing that you're going to need besides Git is a GitHub account. So that again is in that file that I left in the session description with more detailed explanation. But if you haven't already and you want to try to set that up to maybe go through the demo here when we get to it, then that's fine. Or if you want to try out some of these commands, just go to www.github.com and there should be a sign up button in the top right. And use your school email if you want to get the GitHub Student Developer Pack. Instructions for that are also in the doc. All right, you might see throughout the demo specifically, I might use some Linux commands. That's because the Git Bash terminal takes Linux commands. And so just, you don't have to worry about these. These are not really a part of what the focus is for today. If you need help with these at any time when you're hacking, let me know. But I just wanted to let you know that when I type CD, I'm changing a directory. So in your file explorer, when you open it up and you like click around, you're changing directories. And then ls is just to list all the files. So when you can open up your file explorer and see all of the files in there, that's the equivalent to ls. Present working directory is where you're at now. It'll return the path. And then make directory is this command mkdir. And that's just like if you were to right click and select new folder, that's what that's doing. And then I'll give it the name dir or whatever you type there. And then the last thing is you all to edit your code will be using IDEs. So I've heard some about Android Studios, maybe like Jupyter notebooks, Eclipse, stuff like that. So that's where you'll be editing your code. But for me, I'm just going to use a regular text editor. And so I just wanted to give you all a heads up with that, and that'll just be in the demo. But that's what I'm doing there. So without further ado, let's get into what you all came here for, which is Git and GitHub. So we're going to go through a bunch of commands and we're going to explain them conceptually. And then you'll get a better idea of the order and how to do all of them in the demo. Okay, so first, what is a repository? So you might have heard me say repository or repo in the last few minutes. But it's a code base. So it's where all of your code is at, where all of your files are at that have your code in them. And so there are two different like types of repositories that we refer to, which is local and global. So global is the code base that a bunch of people have access to. So that would be like your GitHub, because your team has like access to that, right? And so when you're on GitHub, you can create a new global repository just using their GUI. You can click a button. I think it says like new or something like that under repositories, and then it'll give you a screen that has this on it and you can name it and everything. And so just another note, if you below here, there will be options to add like a README file or a git ignore. If you don't select any of those, it'll give you some starter code. So that's kind of nice. All right. And then what is a repository continued? So we're going to talk about local repositories. So a local repository is a code base that's just on your computer. So your teammates, your friends, they don't have access to it because it's on your computer. And so how you set this up, the global repository, we just clicked the new button in GitHub and it did it for us. But the local repository, we're going to actually open up Git Bash. This is what a Git Bash terminal looks like. And we are going to type the command git init. So you'll notice before all of our commands, so this command is init, we will always use git just to let it know that, hey, this is a git command. And so I wanted to initialize a local repository in this test for slides folder. And I can tell it was successful because this little blue thing here appears that says main. All right, and so the first time that you do this, it might prompt you for your username and your email for your GitHub account, just so that it kind of can make that connection there. So if you're already logged in, I was already logged in, so like this was fine. I just typed git config user.name and it popped up with my username, and then it popped up with my email. So I was all good. But if it asks for that, that's what that means. So you can go ahead and try it. Typing this in does no harm. So if you just want to type git config user.name and see if anything pops up, then go for it, and it might prompt you for your username and your email. All right, so we have a local repository and a global repository. But how do we connect the two? How do we share code between the two? Because that's the ultimate goal, right? Is you want code from your system to be on GitHub so that all of your teammates can see it. So you need to make a connection. And how you make this connection is when you're just starting out, you say git remote add origin. So, and then there's this URL that is copied and pasted from the GitHub repo. So I created this GitHub repo, and then I went to my local and I said git init, and then the very next line I did was, well, it depends what you're using for. We'll see it in the demo, but something you can do to create this connection is you can copy this. If you click on the code button, you can copy this URL, and that will get your code from, or that will make a connection between your code from your global repository and your local repository. All right, so now we're going to start talking about kind of like the steps to get code from your local repository to your global repository. So we need to talk about commits. So commit is an individual change to a file, and this is when we're starting to use Git. So if you have some changes and you're like, okay, I want them to be tracked, I want them to be part of the history, commit them. Because Git creates a unique ID for each commit and records all of the commits and the changes made. So that is your history right there. And the process for committing is you need to add it to the staging area. And from what's called the staging area, you need to commit it. So the commands for that are here, which is git add, and then the name of the file that you want to add to the staging area. Or if you want to add all of the files in your current directory, then you can just do the -- all, and that'll add all of the files to the staging area. And so you might be wondering, like, what is a staging area? Like, how can I see it? How can I see what's going on? And you can do that by saying git status. And so this is totally optional. It'll just show you your staging area. So if you do git status before you add anything, it'll just be blank. And then if you do this git add, then your staging area will show up with a file the next time you type in git status, which is pretty cool. And then from the staging area, you want to commit. So how you commit is with the command commit, and then you do this -m, and you add a message that explains what your commit does, because it's really important when you're tracking all of this to be descriptive about what you're doing and the changes that you're making. So you can go ahead and add a message with the commit. So here's what that code looks like. I just changed a file in my text editor, and then I said git add, and this adds it to the staging area. And then I said git commit, and it'll say, okay, one file was changed and one line was inserted. So perfect, I am good to go, I've committed. Now, once you have committed, what happens if you want to get your code onto your global repository? So if I'm ready to update to my global repository, I've committed my changes, then the next thing that I do is git push. And then you follow it by the branch name that you're pushing to. So we haven't talked about branches yet, so don't worry about that. Just kind of keep that in the back of your mind that you push to the branch that you want to push to on GitHub. And so the command is git push, and then you have this origin, which is what we set up right at the very beginning when we did git remote add origin, and then we did the URL. So that's where this is coming from. So if you type that in, then it'll say, okay, great. It'll load some stuff, and it will go ahead and push it to your global repository. And so you can actually see your commit like we do down here in the global repository. So that's pretty cool. And you can say, okay, I got it from my local repository to the global repository. But when you do that, you kind of leave your teammates in the dust a little bit, because you pushed all this code and you're like, great, I'm awesome. But your teammate has to get that code somehow. And so if your teammate's working on their own repository, what they can do is a pull. And so a pull will get it will update the code in your local repository with the code in the global repository. And so that just makes sure that you both are kind of working off of the same code, but because if you're not, you'll end up getting conflicts, and that's not fun at all. But it's totally fixable, so don't worry. I want you to try some stuff out this weekend, and we can totally help you with any conflicts or anything like that. But just make sure that you know that pull is to get the code from the global repository to your local repository and get that local repository updated. And so what you have to have for pull, again, is this origin. So ideally you would have already set this up, with your like git and init and everything like that. But I just wanted to show again, that's where this comes from. And then it's git pull origin main, and main is probably what you're going to be pulling from, because main is the line of code that you all know works. You're not going to push anything to main that is broken. You can mess around with that in different branches, and we'll go over that, but main is what you're going to be pulling from. Main is the copy that works for all of you. So it's important before you push to pull from the global repository. And again, that's just to make sure that you all are working off of the same version of code and that you are on the same page. So yeah, before you make changes to the repository, it's good to update and pull any differences. And it'll still keep the changes that you've made and everything, but just pull right before you push is always good practice. All right, so here I show a pull. You'll notice I'm like in a different file directory. I was here in test for slides, and then I moved over to person2 test for slides. So I'm trying to simulate like, okay, what if this was on a different computer? So I went ahead and I set up my local repository, and I said, oh, like I want the changes that are on GitHub. How do I do that? So I set up the origin, and then I just ran this command that says git pull origin main, and that will take all of the changes from the global repository and bring them to my system. So it loads a bunch of stuff, and it says, oh, it added a README file or a file called readme.md, and then there was one insertion. So there's like one line in that file. So that's perfect. So just where we are right now, these are some of the commands that we've gone over. So when you're in your working directory, this is your local computer where you change your code, and you're ready to start getting that tracked on its way to the global Git repository. And then first thing you're gonna do is git add. We talked about that, and that adds it to the staging area. And I talked about how you can view what's in the staging area by saying git status. And then the next step in this journey to the global repository is git commit. And that's where you start tracking your changes. So it's like, okay, I'm going to include that in my local Git repository. And then to get it from local into global, it's git push. And then we just covered git pull, which takes it from global all the way back. So you can kind of see how you can move code with these commands. And we'll go over this in the demo as well. All right, so I mentioned branches, and I said main is going to be the one that that's going to be all of your working code. And so main is the branch that all of your code will get merged back to. And what I mean by branch is it's just like a little like section of your code. So everything will stem from main and everything will come back to main. And we'll see a little bit of a diagram here in a second, and hopefully that'll make more sense. You might see it called master some places. That's old. Main is new, but it's the same idea. Where master was the one that people used to not change, and now it's main. And so a branch, why would you want to take out a branch? So a branch is a unique set of code changes. So let's say you have an app and you want to add a random number generator like feature. So that's some feature. I don't know why you would want to add it, but you want to add it. Maybe you take out a branch and you call your branch like random num or something like that, just to add that feature. So how do you take out a branch out of main? Which is just copying the code from where main is at and putting it on a different path so that you don't disrupt main. But you can always take your branch and incorporate it back into main. So that just keeps main safe so that you don't mess with something and then break all of your code. So how you make a branch is you use this git checkout -b and then your branch name. Or if you already have a branch and you haven't named and you just want to switch to it, git checkout and then whatever your branch name is. So I wanted to create a new branch called finish readme because that was the feature or whatever that I was going to add. So I said git checkout -b finish readme, and I can see that I went from main to finish readme. So I'm on my new branch. So that is pretty awesome. The next thing that I want to talk about is pull requests. So when you're dealing with different branches and you are pushing to your global repository, you are going to get a notification on GitHub. So when you push, it'll say like when you push from a separate branch. So we have this compare like finish readme and the main branch. It says, hey, you have two different branches. Do you want to create a pull request? And GitHub will do that on its own when you go through that whole process that goes from add to commit to push. So once you do push, GitHub will show up and it'll say, hey, do you want to create a pull request for this? And you can say, yeah, you can click the button, and all the pull request is going to do is it's going to let your collaborators know that, hey, you have some changes that you want them to take a look at, that you want them to approve. And so GitHub's really awesome in that it pops up with this like create pull request button, and you can type in here like what you changed and everything like that. And we'll see that in the demo a little bit too. So again, I talked about branches. So this is main. Again, master is outdated, but this is main right here. And let's say you want to add a feature. So you take out a branch. And so your branch is like over here, and it's like, all right. And then this represents like a commit. So you made like one change that you wanted to have tracked, and then, oh, you made another change that you wanted to have tracked. So you committed again. But this time you're like, all right, I want to get this back to my main branch. So instead of just committing, you went the whole way and you pushed. So when you push, it's going to show up with a pull request, and your team can say, all right, looks good to me. And then once they do, the next step is to merge it back into main. So what is merge? So merge is exactly what I just said, is you take a branch and you incorporate it back into another branch. So you're likely always going to be merging to main, unless you do some like really fancy stuff with GitHub and Git. So again, we want to have branches other than main so that we can like tinker with things and not worry about breaking it, because main is always going to be kind of like our go-to. If we break it, we can just copy main, and then there we go. And you're back to square one, but it's not broken anymore. So we always want to protect main, so we will commit changes in a branch. So I committed them and pushed them to this finish readme branch. And then I said, all right, let's get them back to main. So what you have to do is you have to switch back to the branch that you want to be like accepting the changes from the other branch. So I switched back to main because I want main to incorporate all of the changes in finish readme. And then I use the command git merge, and then the branch name, which is finish readme, and it will go ahead and update. And it says, okay, I added two things to the readme file. And so that's awesome. Main is updated. You'll also notice in GitHub some GUI components for merge. And yeah, it looks like this. Whenever you kind of like create a pull request, you have different branches, it will pop up with this, and I'll ask you, okay, do you want to merge it? And it'll check for any conflicts. So let's go ahead and talk about what those conflicts are. Just after this, another visualization of merge is we have our main branch, we go and we make a commit, and we make a push, and then we want to get it back to main. So we do git merge and then the name of the branch. So we say git merge feature branch. All right, so what is a merge conflict? What are these conflicts that can arise? It said no conflicts when we wanted to merge. So what can happen? So a merge conflict is when you have two different commits on these branches that are competing with each other. So let's say that there's a print line on line 4, and this print line got changed to say hi instead of hello world, and this print line got changed to say hello instead of hello world. So now this is an issue because Git and GitHub don't know which one to pick. But lucky for you, like you saw in that UI, or in that GUI, there is a section that says, nope, you're all good, no conflicts. But if you do have conflicts, you can look at them there and choose which lines you would like to be correct. So how you avoid this is make sure that you are pulling code from the main branch whenever somebody updates it. So when somebody updates it, go ahead and pull their changes, and then you probably won't run into a merge conflict. All right, the last thing before we get into our demo is cloning. So what is cloning? So let's say, I put this last because let's say this whole presentation, you've been at dinner and your team has been working and they got their GitHub repo set up and you're like, oh, okay, like I'm ready to work. What do I do? You clone. So if you have nothing locally and your team has something globally, you can go ahead and do git clone, and then again, go to this little code button on GitHub and copy this URL. And then that will copy everything from the global repository onto your computer. All right, so with that, I'm gonna go ahead and get the demo set up and we will start with that. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into this demo. So the first thing I said is you can create a global repository using the GitHub GUI. So I'm just going to do that. All I did was I logged into my GitHub account and then it takes me to this screen. I'm going to go ahead and select new repository. So what I'll call this, let's just call it simple README. That's just going to be, I'll make it private because I just want to control who can see and commit to this repository, and I'm not going to add any of these. So if I go ahead and create this repository, then it comes up with this sample code that I mentioned in the conceptual part of this video. So that's really great. So if you don't know where to start, we'll just basically start with what's right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I know that I'm going to need this to set an upstream connection from my global to my local repository, or from my local to global repository rather. And so I'm going to copy this to my clipboard, and then I will open up my Git bash terminal. And so right now I'm in this like home directory. I can see what it is by typing pwd. So it's users, ja-mil. So what I want to do is I want to create a project folder in documents. So I'll go ahead and go into my documents, and then I'm going to make a directory called, let's see, git readme. And then I'll go into that directory. So now I'm here, this is my path, and this is where I want to have my local repository. So I'm going to go ahead and use that very first command we said, which is git init, and that's going to initialize an empty local repository here. So now we see that I have main, so I have my local repository. Then after that, what I want to do is I want to set a connection to this repository here. So we'll go git remote add origin, and then I copied from the clipboard that URL, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it here. So if I do that, I'm now connected to this global repository. So now I can say, okay, what do I want to change? Right now there's nothing in here. So I want to add a README, right? Because this is called simple README. So I'll go ahead and add a README file. And this is the point where you would just code in your own IDE. So whether you're working in Spider, or you're working in Jupyter Notebook, or you're working in Eclipse, like you can go ahead and open your code here and start working on it. But for me, I'm just going to use the text editor. So I'm just going to make a simple README file using the text editor. So if it opens up here, I can just say this is the README. And that's just all I wanted to say because we're not really showing coding skills. We're just going to show Git. So I'll just put some text in there. Now, if we remember the process of trying to get it from my local repository to the global repository, we have to stage our changes for a commit. We have to commit, and then we have to push to our global repository. So if we go git add and then readme, that will stage my file. So now if I say git status, I have this new file readme here. Whereas if I said git status before I did this git add, this would not be here at all. This would be blank. And so now I want to commit it. So I'll say git commit -m, and then I'll just put something like added readme.md. This is my message for the commit. Just as first commit, because this is just my first commit to the repo. So that's changed. And so now you'll notice still nothing has changed here. All that's changed is my local repository. I tracked this change and it gave it this sort of like ID value. So now I want it to be reflected up here. So I'll say git push origin. And then I will go ahead and state that I want it to go. There's no branches yet, so I'll just say git push origin. Actually, git push origin main is what I'll do, because by default, this is going to be the main branch up here. So git push origin doesn't work because it's saying, okay, well, what is the branch that I need to push it to? Like it says here, the current branch has no upstream branch. So when I provide that upstream branch main, which is the default, then it gets it done. So if I go over here to my repository and I refresh, I can see that I've added this file called readme, and the first line says this is the readme. So it's the exact same as my local repository, and I'm on main. So let's say I want to make some other changes. So if I'm some teammate or something like that, it's always a good idea to do git pull, just to make sure that I have the most up-to-date version of the code. And it says I'm already up to date, so that is perfect. And so now, let's say that I want to add a little bit more detail to the README. And so since we're past the initial commit, I'm going to add this feature in a branch. So I'll say git checkout -b, and I'll call this detailed README, because I just want to make the README a little bit more detailed. I want to add to it. And so now I'm in this new branch. And so now I can make my changes. So I will just go to my README file. And it just says, this is the README. And I can say, this is me adding more detail. Lots and lots of detail. This doesn't really matter. This will just be your code. So where I'm just typing sentences that'll go into this README, you will actually be typing code that goes into project folders here. So again, you can make your changes and you can save them. And then we're going to go through the whole process again, where we're just going to say that we want our changes from this branch detailed README to be eventually reflected in main. So what we can do is we can go through the same process. So we have to add it to the staging area, and then we have to commit, and then we have to push. And now since we have a branch, we'll have to merge. So first of all, let me show you the staging area now. So it says that I've modified the README, but it's not staged for a commit. So let's go ahead and fix that. So I'll add it. And now when I do git status, it says it's green. It's like, all right, it's staged for a commit. So now I can commit. So I can do git commit -m, and I can say added detail lines to the README. And that kind of describes what I did. So again, this is just going to track the changes locally with a unique ID, and I'm in this branch still. So now I want to keep this branch, right? Because I want to make sure everything is kind of continuous between my branch and the changes there, as well as my global repository. So what I'm actually going to do is we used to do git push origin main. We used to push it directly to main. But that's not something that you're always going to want to do, because you want to compare and pull requests to make sure that you can settle any conflicts. Or else you can run into some really bad errors with history and getting that mixed up. So I'm actually going to push it to a branch called detailed README. But this is going to be on my global repository. So I can see here right now my only branch is main. But if I go to GitHub and I run this line, it's going to take a second, and then it's going to push it. And now I see that detailed README has pushes less than a minute ago, and it wants to compare and pull request. So now I can go ahead and compare and pull request. And I can say that added detailed lines to the README. I can add a comment if I want, but since I'm not really doing anything major here, then I can create my pull request. And over here, where it says reviewers and assignees, this is where you can tell your team, hey, I need you to look at this before I go ahead and merge. And so I want you to look at this pull request. So over here, you can mess with these, and this is where you can assign them that duty. But since for this example, I don't have any teammates, I will just create my pull request. All right, and so it says that it added successfully. So now let's see if I go back to my code. I have two branches now. I have main and I have detailed README. And these two branches are different. So if I'm in main, it just says this is the README. But if I'm in detailed README, then it has me adding lots and lots of detail. So it has my extra line. So let's say I want this extra detail to be reflected in main. I know it's right. So what I can do is I can go back to this pull request tab, and I can click on the pull request. And I showed you how to merge from the command line, but you can actually merge from GitHub too. And we talked about merging from the command line in the conceptual part of the video, but you can merge using the GitHub GUI as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that because it's just easiest. So I will go ahead and select merge pull request. And this is the point where before you do this, you would want your team to look at it. Like I said, you can assign reviewers and assignees, or you can just talk to your team and tell them to take a look at your new branch. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, yep, it looks good. The branch looks good. The branch works. I think we should make that our main copy. And so you can confirm the merge. And so it'll say it's successfully merged and closed. So that is perfect. So if we go back to our code, we see that main is now updated with lots and lots of detail. And then if we go to detailed README, we see it's the same thing. So we successfully merged those changes. So this is just a really quick demonstration of Git and a little bit of GitHub at the end when we use the pull request and the merge. So I hope you learned a lot from this video. And if you have any questions about any part of it, please reach out. Don't feel afraid to ask anything, because we definitely want to help you any way we can with this project collaboration. So thank you all for coming, and I look forward to answering any questions you have.